welcome back to my channel. So I am once again kind of hopping on the bandwagon to one of those really cute fashion trends a little bit too late. So today I'm going to be finally doing a knitting tutorial for you guys. It's not a sewing tutorial today, which is pretty rare for me, because I want to make one of those super overly chunky like knit cardigans that we were seeing like last year, because once again I am always late to these trends. But if they stick around this long, that means they're really good. So I thought it was finally time to cave and make myself one. So I went to Michael's and I found this super chunky yarn. And this is by the brand Loops and Threads, and I got 2 of these, and I'm probably going to need more. And then I also picked up some size 17 knitting needles, and these are probably the biggest needles I have ever used. I usually do like really tiny knitting, so this should be really fun. And this yarn is insanely thick. So what I ended up doing is I took one of these threads and I basically split it in half and then tied the ends together so that it is half as thick. And I think I'm going to be using this for it, so I'm going to have to do that to all this yarn. So I'll show you guys how to do that in a minute. And this kind of cardigan really shouldn't be too hard, and because we're using such a thick yarn, it also shouldn't be too long of a process because we're not going to need very many stitches to get the length that we need. So it should be pretty fun and pretty beginner friendly. And so this is going to be the color of my cardigan, but then I might make some like really puffy like strawberries or something else to go on top of it. I'm not sure yet. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun, and I think we should get started. So the first step on this cardigan is we're going to have to take our super chunky yarn and make it into slightly less chunky yarn. And so the way this works is this yarn, if you kind of untwist it, is actually made up of 4 different threads. And so all we're really doing is we're going to take 2 of those threads and split this in half so that we have 2 pieces of yarn now. And we're going to do that to the whole thing, and it does get kind of twisted, so you might have to cut it in a few spots or just kind of wind the yarn to kind of go with it. And while I continue to work on this, I thought I'd give you guys a little bit of a heads up on my knitting experience. So basically I learned to knit when I was like probably 7 years old. I don't really remember, but my mom taught me how to knit, and I was actually taught the European way of knitting, because there are actually 2 different kinds of knitting, which are the European way and the American way. And most people I know do the American way. So if my knitting style looks a little bit weird to you, it's because I'm doing it the European way. And the technique for knitting is going to yield the exact same result, but the technique is just a little bit different. And some people find the American way easier, some people find the European way easier. This is just the way that I've always done it, so that's the way I'm going to show you guys. But if you do knit the American way, you should be able to use this pattern the exact same way that you normally would. Or if you've always found knitting kind of difficult, you might want to give it a try the way that I teach it, because it might just work better for you. I love it when you get it to like this state where you can just hold it and have it unwind. It's very satisfying. And it's officially split in 2. And now that we have our 2 giant messy piles, I'm going to tie those ends together and start winding it up into one big skein. Alright, there we have it. And now we can start casting on our stitches to actually start knitting. So to cast on, we're going to need to leave kind of a tail of our yarn right now. So I'm going to lay it over my hand and bring the end with the tail over and kind of make a cross. And then I'm going to put my fingers underneath the first yarn and grab the second one. And then I'm going to pull on this end here. And now we have a slip knot where if you pull on the tail end, you can make it smaller or bigger. So I'm going to slip that onto my first needle. And I'm going to tighten it, but not too tight. You still want it to be nice and loose on your needle. And now we're going to take our tail end and put it down and have the other side kind of up. So we're going to take our pointer and thumb fingers and put it through these yarns here. Then I'm going to bring the other hands up, and then our yarn should look like this. So it wraps around your pointer finger and goes across the others, and this one goes across your wrist. And then I'm going to fold over these fingers and grab it, and also grab our tail end so we have some tension here. And now to cast on, I'm going to hold this stitch with my thumb so it doesn't fall off. And I'm going to bring the tip of my needle around this side here, grabbing this one, and then pulling it through the hole under our thumb. And that is our second cast on stitch. So to do that again, I'm going to bring the point around through my thumb right here, then grabbing the yarn across my pointer finger and looping it around and going back through the hole we came from. And now we have 3. And we're going to do this process until we have a total of 13 stitches. And here are all of our stitches. And so when you're casting on, you are using up that tail thread, But I left a little bit too much, so you can just go ahead and cut it right now if you want to, or just leave it if it's not bothering you. But if you run out of tail thread, you're going to have to start over and add a little bit more and cast on again. So now I'm going to teach you guys how to do your first row of knit stitches. And so we're going to take the yarn attached to the ball here, and we're going to wrap it around our pointer finger on our left hand, or on your right hand if you are left-handed. And I'm going to push it to the back side of our needle. And then I'm going to pick up our other needle in my right hand, and I'm going to go through the first stitch towards the back, like this, wrap around the thread attached to my pointer finger, and pull it back through that stitch. And then we're going to slip that stitch off of our left needle. And now you should have one stitch on the right. And I'm going to repeat that all the way down these stitches. So I'm going to go through the back of the next stitch. And the reason why it looks like I'm grabbing two stitches is because remember we split our yarn into two threads. So this is actually one stitch. So I'm going to go through, wrap my needle over and around my pointer finger thread and pull it back through that stitch, and then slip it off the needle. And like I said, you don't want the stitches to be too tight, but you don't want them too loose either. And it might take a minute to find the kind of right tension that fits your knitting style. And that is our first row of knit stitches. And now I'm going to teach you guys the other stitch, which is the purl stitch. And after we learn that one, that's basically all you need to know. So now that we have our first row, I'm going to flip the needle back over this way, and you should have this kind of bumpy stitch on the back. And again, I'm going to wrap our thread around my finger. And now whenever we start our next row, we can actually do something where we're just going to put in our next needle and slip off that stitch without knitting it. And this is going to give us a kind of elongated stitch around the edges, which will make it easier to sew all of our pieces together later. And so now to do our purl stitch, I took our hand with our thread and I put the thread in front of our stitches this time. And now I'm going to put our right needle through the front of our next stitch. And I'm going to actually take my thumb, and this is how I'm going to kind of manipulate the yarn to make it a little bit easier. And so I'm going to bring it upwards like this and kind of use it to wrap around the needle. And then we're going to go back through that hole, and we're going to slip off that stitch. And so to do this again, we're going to make sure our yarn is on the front side of our needle. We're going to go through the front of that first stitch. I'm going to use my thumb to kind of wrap it around the needle, going first underneath it and then over. And then I'm going to pull back through that stitch and slip it off the left needle. And we're going to repeat that down all of these stitches. And now we have our first two rows. And so this side is our knit stitches, and this side are our purl stitches. And now we're just going to repeat knitting a row, and then purling a row, and knitting a row, purling a row, until we reach our desired length. And from now on, all of the stitches that I start with, I'm just going to slip that one off, and then keep knitting or purling the rest of the row. And if you ever forget which stitch you're supposed to be doing, if the bubbly side is towards you, that means you're going to purl. And if the knit side is facing towards you, that means you're going to knit. And on the purl side, it's actually a lot easier to go towards the front of the needle, because if you try to knit the purl side, it's going to be actually a lot harder to grab those stitches. And now that we kind of have those basics down, it's really easy to just wind up your yarn and take this with you wherever you go. Well, I was going to go back to my desk and show you guys how to cast off, but Basil is so comfortable that I'm just going to do it from here. So now I've been knitting and I've done a total of 40 rows, and it's about 16 inches long, which I think is good for me. So now I'm going to show you guys how to get it off of the knitting needles. Hi. Hello. Did you just wake up? So basically what we're going to do is we're going to start like we normally would by wrapping it around our finger and taking off the first stitch. And then I'm going to knit the second one like we normally would. But now instead of continuing to knit, I'm actually going to go back to this first stitch, and I'm going to take our left needle and I'm going to just grab it and slip it over top of the one that we had just knitted and let it fall off like that. So now there's only one stitch on our right needle. And again, I'm going to knit the next stitch, and now I'm going to take the second stitch on our right needle bring my left one over and grab it and take it over top of the one that we had just knitted and let it fall off. And we're going to repeat that until we only have one stitch left on our right needle. And now to finish it off, we can just cut this thread here and pull our needle out. And now we have our first front panel. So now I'm just gonna go ahead and whip up a second one of these. As a quick update, I actually had to wait and I bought different knitting needles because I wasn't really happy with the ones I was using. They were just making it a little bit too dense and I wanted to have like a little bit more room through it. I honestly could have gone even bigger, but I think I'm happy with this. And so now I am using size 19 needles. And I already went ahead and made my second panel. So now both of the front pieces are done. And I'm going to start working on the back pieces now. But first I need to split some more yarn. So for this one, I'm going to cast on 30 stitches and I'm going to knit for 35 rows the same way that we did last time before casting off. So after I finished knitting our one back piece, I started work on the sleeves. And for the sleeves, we're obviously going to have to make 2 of them. And we're going to start off by casting on 30 stitches. And we're going to knit this for a total of 38 rows. But you don't want to cast off yet because we have to add a little cuff that I'm going to show you guys how to do later. Alright, and I just finished knitting our sleeve for a total of 38 rows. And now it's finally time to start shaping the cuff. So because this is obviously very gigantic, we need to start taking it in a bit. So I'm going to show you guys how to decrease your stitches. And we're essentially just going to be knitting 2 together to make them into 1 stitch instead of 2. So for our next row, I'm going to start off the way that we usually do, just by slipping the first one. And now instead of knitting 1 of my stitches, I'm going to grab 2 of them this time. And I'm just going to knit them together and slide it off like usual. And then I'm going to knit the next one. And then again, I'm going to knit 2 together. And we're going to repeat that all the way across. Knit 1, knit 2 together, knit 1, knit 2 together. And that is our first decreasing row. And now we're going to flip it to the other side, and we're going to do just a regular row of purling. And now we're going to do 1 more row of decreases. So this time we're going to do knit 2 together, knit 2, knit 2 together. And now we obviously have a lot less stitches on our needle. Then we're going to do 1 more row of just regular purls. But for the next step, we're actually going to need an even number of stitches, and right now I currently have 15. And so I'm actually going to purl the first 2 stitches together and then just continue as normal, so we have that even number. And so this works pretty much the same way. I'm going to put my needle through both of these and then just purl them at the same time. And then it's finally time to create the really cute like rib texture you always see at the bottom of cardigans. And the way we do this is we're going to start by slipping off our first stitch. And then instead of knitting into this stitch, I'm actually going to purl the next one. And then I'm going to knit the next one. And then I'm going to purl the one after that. And we're going to do this knit purl pattern all the way across. And then once we turn it to the purl side, we're still going to be doing the knit purl, but we want to make sure that we are keeping the right pattern. So I'm going to slip off my first one, but you can kind of see that this one has the purl shape, this one has the knit shape, purl, knit, purl. So I'm going to just slip off the first one and then start purling and knitting, purling and knitting. And then you'll slowly start to see this pattern kind of form. And then we're going to repeat this purl, knit, purl technique for another 3 rows for a total of 5. And then I'm going to go ahead and cast it off. And casting off works the exact same way with this ribbing technique, except we're just going to knit and purl into each row the way that we were, and then we're going to slip off the back one. And there is our finished sleeve. And I actually already made the second one, so now we finally have all of our pattern pieces. And now that we have all the pieces, it's time to start sewing them up. So I think I'm going to start off by sewing the sleeves. And for this, there's a few different things you could use to start sewing it up, because we are going to be using this super thick yarn still. So you could use a really big crochet hook or a big tapestry needle. But I unfortunately do not have either of those things on hand at the moment. So I'm going to be using this crochet hook that like also has this like needle on the end. And hopefully it'll be big enough to fit these giant threads. And so when I was cutting all of my threads, oftentimes I would leave these really long strands to use to sew it up. So I'm just going to take my first one and thread it through this needle. Let's pray that I can get it through there. Oh, that actually wasn't bad at all. And so when we were slipping off our first stitch, what we were doing is we were creating these like long slip stitches along the edge. And so that's where we are going to be threading these through. And so I'm going to take my bottom thread here and I'm going to be threading it through this first stitch here. And then I'm going to go down through the next stitch and then bring it up through the next stitch on the other side. And then I'm going to go down the next one and then up the other side. And we're just going to repeat this all the way up the sleeve. And then once I get to the top, I'm just going to tie it off. And here's our finished sleeve. And I'm going to be using that exact same technique to finish sewing up the cardigan. So the other places I'm going to sew is I'm going to take our back piece and either of our side panels. And so we're going to sew up their shoulder seams up here. And then for the side seam, we need to mark out where the sleeve is going to go. So after that's sewn, I'm going to measure it out and start sewing from down here all the way to the bottom edge. And we're going to do the same thing on the other side. And then I'm also going to sew up the other sleeve. And this video is obviously a knitting tutorial, but I really wanted to add some cute strawberries to my sweater. So I'm actually going to teach you guys how to crochet right now. And this step is of course totally optional. And I'm sure you guys could come up with some other really cute stuff to like put on the sweater too if you don't know how to crochet. But if you guys want to give it a go, I'm going to show you how. And so for this, you're going to need a crochet hook. I'm using a size G crochet hook. And I'm using these 2 yarns that I got from Michaels. And my red one is pretty thick, but my green one is pretty thin. So to start us off on this process, I'm going to take the end of my red yarn and wrap it around my 2 fingers. And then I'm going to take my crochet hook and go through this loop and grab the thread. And then I'm going to wind it on my finger And I'm going to again grab it with my hook and then pull it through that little loop. And so for those of you who do know how to crochet, we're just making a magic loop. And now we're going to do 3 single crochets into this loop. And so I'm going to wrap the yarn around my finger and then insert my hook into this loop, grab my yarn and pull it back out. And now you should have 2 loops on your needle. So we're going to grab our thread one more time and then pull it through both of these loops. And I'm going to repeat that 2 more times. I'm going to go into the loop, grab my yarn, pull it out, grab it one more time, and then pull it through both of my stitches. And now I'm going to chain 1 and turn. So that means I'm just going to take my hook and grab my yarn and pull it through just this one loop, and then switch sides. And now we have this little like tail here around this loop, and if you pull it, it's just going to gather this up. And now we have these 3 like little heart shapes, and those are actually the stitches we're going to go into. So now I'm going to go through the first heart, grab my yarn and pull it out so we have 2 stitches, and then I'm going to grab it one more time and go through both of them. And then I'm going to do 2 of those into the next stitch so we get 1 extra stitch. And then I'm going to do 1 more into the last one. And then I'm going to chain 1 and turn. And now we're going to put 2 single crochets into the first stitch to increase 1 there. And then we're going to do 1 single crochet into the next 2 stitches. And then again, we're going to put 2 into the last stitch. And then we're going to chain 1 and turn. And now we're going to single crochet across all of these top stitches and put 2 single crochets into the center stitch, and then continue single crocheting all the way across. And then we're going to chain 1 and turn. And now for the next row, we're just going to do single crochets all the way across without any increases. And chain 1 and turn. And then again, we're going to crochet until we reach the center. And then we're going to put 2 single crochets into the same stitch there. 1, 2. And then we're going to continue single crocheting all the way across. And once we reach the end, chain 1, turn. And then for the next row, we're going to single crochet the first 2. And then we're going to put 2 single crochets into the third stitch to increase. And then we're going to crochet all the way across until we reach the third stitch from the end. And again, we're going to increase there, so put 2 single crochets. And then finish going across, chain 1 and turn. And then we're on to the very last row. And this time, instead of increasing on these stitches, we're actually going to decrease. And so the way we're going to do that is we're going to put our needle into the first stitch and grab our yarn. And then before we pull through these 2, we're going to go through the stitch after that and also grab our yarn. And then we're going to loop around the thread and pull through all 3 of those stitches. And then we're going to single crochet all the way across. And then once we have our last 2 stitches here, we're going to do the same thing of going through the first one and grabbing our yarn, and then going through the second one and also grabbing our yarn, and then pulling through all 3 of these stitches. And then we can cut our thread and pull our needle out. And there's our strawberry base. And now to make the little strawberry top, we're going to work with our green yarn. And again, we're going to start off by making a magic loop. So I'm going to loop the yarn around my 2 fingers, take my needle and pull the yarn through, and then do a chain 1. And now we're going to start off by doing a chain of 6 stitches. So I'm going to loop my hook around, grab it and pull it through that 1 stitch 6 times. And then we're going to single crochet into each of these stitches. And so we're not going to do it into the first one, because if we go back through there, nothing's going to happen. So we're going to go into the second heart, and you want to put your needle through 2 of the stitches and leave 1 on the bottom. Then we're going to grab our yarn, pull it through, and then loop it around again and pull it through both of those 2 stitches. And we're going to do that all the way down. And now that we're back to our little loop here, I'm going to do a slip stitch into it. So I'm going to take my hook and put it through the loop, grab my thread and bring it back out. And now instead of wrapping it around and pulling through both like we've been doing, I'm just going to take these 2 stitches and I'm going to slip the first stitch through the second one. And that is our slip stitch. And then from there, I'm going to do another chain of 6 stitches, and I'm going to single crochet into the first one. But then instead of single crocheting all the way down, I'm actually going to do a half double stitch. So what we're going to do is, instead of going directly into the stitch, we're actually going to loop our yarn around our needle and then go into the stitch. And then we're going to grab the yarn and pull it through, And then we have 3 loops on our needle, and I'm going to wrap our yarn around and pull through all 3 of these stitches. And I'm going to repeat that all the way down. And then I'm going to slip stitch again into the loop. And now this first smaller little piece that we made here is our stem of our strawberry, and this piece that we just made is the leaf. So I'm going to make 3 more leaves before cutting my yarn and pulling my hook out. But like I said, even if you don't know how to crochet, I think there are still plenty of really cute designs you could do on the cardigan. Like if you know how to make pom-poms, you could do some like pom-pom cherries. You could even buy like appliques. You could do some like little ribbon bows. Like there's just a whole bunch of other things you could do as well. And then to just close up the circle, we're going to pull on this little thread here, and we have our cute little strawberry top. And then I just take these 2 little extra threads on the back and use that to tie it to the strawberry. And now I'm just going to work on making a whole bunch more of these to sew onto the cardigan. Alright, well here's to this hopefully being the last ball of yarn I have to split. I have honestly gotten better at this though. Right now my technique is I literally just pull it for as long as I can without it getting like too twisted. And then once it is past that point, I take my ball of yarn and I like twist it around it, and I put my fingers through it and just grab like a thread of it to hold it in place for a minute. And then I just lift that up so that all of the twists can come undone. And it's very satisfying. Yeah, and I'm trying to remember exactly how many balls of yarn I ended up having to use. And I want to say it was either 7 or 8. I really should have kept better track of it. It's definitely not a cheap sweater, but it is a lot of fun to make nonetheless. Well, this cardigan is looking so awesome. And now there's one more little thing that I want to add, and I want to add like this same ribbed trim around the collar and the bottom. So I'm going to show you guys how to pick up these stitches and knit that. So I'm going to start with knitting the bottom. So starting on one side, you can kind of see that we have these stitches along the bottom. So I'm going to take my yarn and I'm going to put my needles through that first loop. And I'm going to pick up my yarn by putting it around and pulling it through. And then I'm going to leave our tail the way it is, and I'm going to wrap the other end around my finger. And then I'm going to put my needle through this loop again, grab more yarn, and I'm going to keep doing this all the way across. So we're picking up all of these stitches. Alright, I finally got them all on, and it is very cramped on these needles. And now I'm going to do that same knit purl pattern all the way across this for 5 rows. And then I'm going to cast this all off. And there's the cute trim on the bottom. And now I had planned to do a trim around the neckline as well. But this is all of the yarn that I have left, which is not going to be enough to do that. So I think I'm just going to leave it the way it is, and it still looks super cute. And now I'm going to start sewing on all of the strawberries. And again, I'm just going to be using this crochet hook with the little end on it. And I'm just going to take all of the excess ends and use those to stitch them on. And once all of these strawberries are sewn on, this cardigan is done. Alright, well, I am absolutely obsessed with this cardigan. I think the strawberries were such a good call. They turned out insanely cute. The only thing is it is unfortunately way too hot to wear this right now. but as soon as the weather cools down, this is going to be the thing I'm grabbing because I'm so excited to wear it out. And call me crazy, but honestly, the best time to start knitting projects is in the summer because by the time you finish them, it's finally cold enough to wear them. Because I typically start knitting in the winter and by the time I finish everything, it is literally too hot to wear it. So I think this cardigan makes a super fun summer activity so you're ready to wear it in the fall. And I really hope you guys give it a try, and if you do, please send me pictures on Instagram. I would absolutely love to see them. And thank you guys so much for hanging out with me and watching this video. I hope you guys liked it. And yeah, I'll see you guys next time. Bye!